Rain lashed the city in sheets of silver. Aurora's iPhone 17 Pro Max slipped from her trembling hand. It clattered across the metal grate, skidding toward the rushing water below. Her heart seized. Everything she built lived inside that device. Cade dove forward, rain blinding his eyes, fingers stretching into the dark. If he missed, they would lose more than just a phone. They would lose each other. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video. The more voices we reach, the louder these stories become. The moment Aurora Vale realized her iPhone 17 Pro Max was missing, the world tilted like a tray in a server's trembling hands. She was halfway through the revolving door of the Wexford Tower, coat flaring at her thighs when her fingers swept the inside of her tote and met only silk lining. No cold slab of titanium, no reassuring weight of a life that lived behind Face ID. She stopped so fast the door nudged her spine. A businessman cursed under his breath and pushed past. Aurora stepped back into the lobby's hush, heart thudding, mind slashing through consequences with a CFO's clinical cruelty. Two-factor codes, vault keys, unreleased investor deck, personal notes about her mother's surgery, voice memos that held the fragile spine of an acquisition she'd been assembling for months. A phone wasn't a device. It was a dam holding back the river. She retraced the last 5 minutes. Valet, elevator, lobby, curb. The Uber. The black sedan with the peppermint clean interior, and the driver who'd glanced at her once in the rear view and then not at all, which she'd appreciated after a day of cameras and questions. She'd balanced the phone on her thigh while answering a text. The sedan hit a pothole, and the device skated toward the seatbelt buckle. She'd told herself she'd tuck it away at the light. She hadn't. Aurora turned to the concierge. "I need to call my phone," she said, the words tight, her breath fraying at the edges. She was a thick, curvy woman who moved like water around obstacles. Her winter-white coat cinched at the waist, her auburn hair caught in a velvet ribbon, her makeup efficient rather than ornate. People mistook softness in her body for softness in her will. The people who made that mistake no longer worked in her orbit. The concierge slid a handset across polished stone. Aurora dialed her own number. 1 ring, 2. On the third, it clicked. "Hello?" a man's voice said, low and steady, the kind you believed before you had decided if you should. "My phone," Aurora said, gripping the counter. "You found it." "I think you left it in the back seat," he said. "I'm the driver. Name's Cade. I was pulling away when I heard it buzz. Thought it was mine until I saw your lock screen." "My lock screen," she repeated, absurdly exposed by the thought of a stranger seeing it. Her and her brother on a pier in Maine, cheeks wind-burned, their mother between them in a borrowed hoodie, laughing with her mouth open. "Can you bring it back to Wexford? She heard the old reflex. Money as solvent. "I'll compensate you for your time." A soft chuckle warmed the line. "No need. I'm 5 minutes out. Sit tight." "You're sure?" "It matters to me that it gets back to you, and I figure it matters to you too." A pause like a hand offered without pressure. "I'll be there." The call ended. Aurora stared at the phone cradle like it might sprout legs and follow him. She saw herself in a mirror column. Curves in a coat that fit like an argument she'd decided to win. Eyes shining with a fear she didn't let her board see. She thought of the year her father left and took silence with him. How her mother had taught her to pour cement in the cracks, to keep the hole from splitting. Control was the cement. The missing phone was a fissure humming with water. She stepped outside to cold that bit through wool. Traffic smeared into chrome and red. A black sedan eased toward the curb, signal blinking. Cade stepped out first. He was taller than she'd registered from the rear view, broad-shouldered under a dark coat, a knit cap pulled low, the line of his jaw trimmed neat. His skin was a deep brown, warm against the white of the day. He held her phone in both hands, not like property, more like a borrowed book he didn't want to dog-ear. "Aurora Vale?" he asked, voice the same steady wavelength. "Yes," she said. He offered the device. The titanium edges pressed cool into her palm. The world rearranged itself with a click she felt in her ribs. The lock screen flashed her family's faces. Something in her unclenched so suddenly she swayed. "You okay?" he asked, not stepping closer, not stepping away. She nodded, the motion small, honest. "You have no idea what you just returned." He smiled. It wasn't the grin men gave her when they thought charm was currency. It was quieter, like something he meant in full. "I have an idea," he said. "I keep my whole life in mind too. It hollows you out when it's gone." "It does." She was surprised by the we in it. "Cade, was it? Thank you. Please let me." "No," he said gently, before she could reach for money. "I didn't do it for a tip." She lifted her chin, not used to a refusal that didn't push or pull. "Then let me do something that isn't a tip," she said. 10 minutes. Coffee. My hands are still shaking, and I'd rather not do it alone." His eyes flicked to her fingers, which betrayed her with a tremor. "Okay," he said. "There's a place around the corner that doesn't burn the beans." They walked side by side, their reflections briefly aligning in glass. The cafe was narrow, cinnamon in the air, a chalkboard promising pies that sold out by dusk. The barista greeted Katie by name, and Aurora with the professional brightness that attaches to a well-cut coat and a face that has appeared on the cover of a magazine. Aurora ordered a cortado, Katie a peppermint tea. They chose a table by the window where winter light fell in squares. "Thank you for not posting my lock screen to the internet," Aurora said when her heartbeat could be contained by a ceramic cup. "That's where the world is now. If it didn't happen publicly, it didn't happen." "My favourite things happen privately," Cade said. "Those usually last longer." She felt the quip she'd use on television die on her tongue. "What do you do besides rescue CEOs from existential collapse?" she asked instead. "Drive," he said, as if he didn't owe the world an origin story. "Then, and build. I do finish carpentry when the commissions come. Floating shelves, staircases that don't scream when you step on them." "You make things that stay made," she said. He nodded, and his eyes creased. "You make things that move fast." She laughed, surprised to hear the warmth of it. "I do. I run Vale Capital. We invest in infrastructure with bad PR, sewer pipes, smart grids, water sensors, things you only notice when they break." "So you make things stay made too," he said, and she felt the compliment like a coat over her shoulders. Her phone buzzed between them. Call from Morgan. Aurora flipped it over, a small defiance. For once, the call could wait. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Only if it's not whether I'm single," she said lightly, reflexive shield. He shook his head, smile angled. "I wasn't going to. I was going to ask why you don't use a case." She watched her own hand stroke the phone's clean edge. "Because every case I like gets discontinued 2 weeks after I buy it, and because I like to remember not to drop what matters." "That's a lot of trust to put in your grip," Cade said. "My grip has been my way through," she said, and surprised herself with the admission. Something softened between them that wasn't flirtation so much as recognition. He told her about the rhythm of the city at dawn, the bakeries humming, the street sweepers drawing lines of wet light. She told him about the one time she almost quit, how she'd built a company that made invisible things work and realized she'd become invisible to herself. He listened the way good carpenters measure twice, and she realized her own voice had been moving at the speed of avoidance. Her phone vibrated again. "Her brother? How's Mom's consult? Call me." The tremor returned. Cade noticed and didn't ask. "Answer it," he said softly. "I'll get us more hot water." She nodded, stepped outside, and the air bit clean. "She's okay," her brother said when she called. "They're adjusting her meds. She told me not to bother you before your big meeting. I told her you were already bothered." Aurora stared at her reflection in the cafe glass, a woman who could buy a building and still feel powerless in a hospital hallway. "Tell her I'm coming tonight," she said. "Tell her I'll bring lemon pie." "Who are you with?" he asked, teasing. "I hear you smiling." "A man who returned what I thought I'd lost," she said, and the words felt larger than the phone. When she went back in, Cade had refilled her cup and set a slice of lemon pie between them, 2 forks leaning like crossed oars. "On the house," he said. "Maya said you looked like you needed citrus." "Maya's preternaturally perceptive," Aurora said, and this time when her phone rang, she silenced it without guilt. They ate in companionable intervals. The pie was tart enough to make her eyes water. She told him about her mother's garden. He told her about his father's hands, how they'd taught him to sand with the grain and with his breath. 10 minutes stretched into 40 the way late light stretches a shadow. She forgot the camera that was always pointed at her, even when it wasn't. She remembered her own name as something that predated the company on the door. When it was time to go, Because time, like a board meeting, always arrives. Cade stood and put his cap on. "I'll walk you back," he said. Outside, the wind tried to undo everything warm they'd made between sips. At the curb, she turned to him. "I can pay you for the ride," she said, because she needed to say it once more to honour who she'd been. "You can," he said, "or you can owe me a story next time." "Next time assumes a next time," she said, pulse ticked high. "City like this," he said, "it puts people in the same orbit until they either collide or learn choreography." She laughed. "What if we try choreography first?" He held her gaze, then pulled a business card from his pocket, the edges soft from being touched. "Cade Bosun," it read. "Driver, carpenter." Underneath, the words "honest work," clean lines. "If you ever need shelves that don't complain," he said. "If you ever need capital that doesn't either," she said. He lifted a hand in a small salute and stepped away. Aurora watched the back of him fold into the city, a shape that might be familiar soon. She looked down at her phone, alive again in her palm, and unlocked it. The screen filled with demands, alarms, requests. She slid her thumb across and, before anything else, created a new contact, Cade. Then she added a note only she would see, returned what matters. Inside the lobby again, the concierge smiled politely, unaware that something had shifted a degree on its hinge. Aurora moved through the revolving door with the feeling of a room that had been aired out at last. The meeting upstairs would be a siege. Her mother would want lemon pie. Investors would orbit with their gravity. But the day had made a small, defiant promise. Control could be accompanied by grace, and a stranger's steady voice could make a lost thing into a beginning. Aurora Vale had a rule about mornings. Never let the day know you're afraid of it. She showered in water hot enough to sting, dressed in lines sharp enough to warn, and wrapped her body, the thick, curvy body that had always drawn commentary, into clothes that announced she was not taking votes on her existence. A pencil skirt, a silk blouse in winter emerald, a camel coat. She pinned her hair back so her jaw was visible, a declaration that she had no time for shadows. Still, the memory of yesterday pressed against her, the lost iPhone, the tremor in her hands, and the man who returned it like it was something holy. Cade. She hadn't meant to think his name before coffee. She hadn't meant to type his number into her phone. And she certainly hadn't meant to scroll to it now, thumb hovering, as if calling him might stabilize her against the chaos already arriving by email. Her CFO had sent a 3-page analysis before dawn, heavy with phrases like margin compression and regulatory overhang. Her mother had texted a cheerful good morning with a sunflower emoji that was supposed to mask the undertone of hospital tests. Aurora had read both with the same sinking sensation that she was two people stitched together and the thread was thinning. At the curb outside Wexford Tower, a driver opened the back door of a town car. She slid in, set her tote beside her, and leaned her head back. The glass separated her from the city's racket, but it didn't insulate her from herself. She saw Cade in her mind, that steady jawline, the way his eyes didn't skim but stayed. She remembered lemon pie and how, for 40 stolen minutes, she had spoken without trimming her words into weapons. The meeting was a war room. Investors hunched over their laptops, waiting for her to falter. Aurora didn't. She never did. She dissected numbers with a surgeon's blade, argued for water sensor pipelines like they were the bloodstream of the city, won the vote she needed. They applauded politely, some grudgingly. She stood straighter. But when the door closed behind her, the victory felt thinner than paper. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. "Miss Vale?" the voice asked. "Yes?" "This is Cade. I hope I'm not intruding. You said, well, you didn't say, but I thought." He broke off, then steadied. "You left your notebook in the cafe yesterday, the one with the leather cover." Aurora's hand flew to her tote. Empty space. Her pulse stumbled. That notebook was where she scribbled the beginnings of everything. Half-dreamed ideas. Numbers she hadn't dared commit to the cloud, sketches of solutions too raw to show. Losing her phone had been terror. Losing the notebook would have been grief. "You have it?" she asked, sharper than she meant. "I do," he said, "and I won't read it, if that's your fear. Words aren't mine to borrow unless they're given." Her throat tightened. "Where are you?" "Outside the tower," he said, "by the fountain." She hung up without goodbye and strode to the lobby. The revolving door spilled her into the street, where the fountain sprayed silver against slate. And there he was, leaning against the edge, notebook in hand, no pretense of invisibility. "You're starting a pattern," she said when she reached him, "returning things I can't lose." "Maybe you're starting one too," he said, smiling, "leaving things where I can find them." It startled a laugh from her, quick and unguarded. She reached for the notebook, but he didn't immediately let go. His fingers brushed hers, warm, deliberate. She should have stepped back. Instead, she stood still, he asked. "Or do CEOs only drink cortados during crisis?" Aurora's instinct was to refuse. Time was money. Attention was leverage. But then her phone buzzed again, and she silenced it without looking. "Coffee," she said. The cafe was busier than yesterday, noise ricocheting off the tin ceiling. They found a corner table. Aurora shed her coat, and Cade's eyes flicked over her blouse, not like a man cataloguing curves, but like someone acknowledging the full of her, seeing that she occupied her chair without apology. It made her pulse quicken in ways boardroom victories never had. "You're not what I expected," she said before she could stop herself. "What did you expect?" A driver who shrugged off a lost phone, someone who wouldn't know what a leather notebook meant. "My father kept one," he said. "Not with numbers, with prayers, lists of things he couldn't carry unless he wrote them down. Words are more than ink." Aurora stared at him, then glanced at her notebook, the leather cover scarred by use. "So you're saying you know me better than I thought?" "I'm saying you don't have to explain why it matters," he said. The words threaded through her like balm. For a long time she had lived on explanation, defending her body in rooms full of men, defending her ambition at family dinners, defending her choices even to herself. And here was a man saying, "No defense required." "Do you ever think about what people see when they look at you?" she asked. "All the time," he said, leaning back. "But then I think about what I see when I look at them. That usually feels more important." "What do you see when you look at me?" Cade didn't flinch. A woman who holds everything too tightly because she's afraid of dropping anything, and someone who deserves to set one thing down without fear. Aurora's eyes stung. She disguised it with a sip of coffee. "You make observations like you're carving wood," she said. "Precise, irreversible." "Better than splinters," he said softly. Her phone buzzed again, this time her mother's name. She answered. "Aurora, don't worry, but the doctor wants me to stay overnight. It's routine. I didn't want you." "I'm coming," Aurora cut in. "No, darling, stay at work. You're busy." Aurora looked across the table at Cade, who watched her with quiet steadiness. She felt suddenly certain that she couldn't do this one alone. "I'm on my way," she said, then hung up. She gathered her things. Cade rose too. "Hospital?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I'll drive," he said simply. And for once, she didn't argue. In the car, the city slid past in grey streaks. Aurora's pulse hammered. Hospitals had always felt like thresholds, rooms where control went to die. She stared out the window until she felt Cade's voice. "You don't have to be composed with me," he said. Her throat tightened. She turned, met his gaze in the mirror. Something inside her cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. She let out a breath that was almost a sob. "Good," he said. "That's better." When they reached the hospital, he parked and came around to open her door. She hesitated. "You don't have to come in," she said. "I know," he said, "but I can." She nodded, and they walked in together, side by side. Aurora felt the strange steadiness of it, how a man who had been a stranger 36 hours ago now felt like ballast. In her mother's room, laughter met them. Her mother, silver hair mussed, hospital gown askew, waved. "Aurora, darling, you didn't need to." "Oh, and who's this?" Aurora opened her mouth, closed it. Then, "This is Cade. He returned what I thought I'd lost." Her mother smiled, eyes sparking with mischief. "Then keep him close. That's the kind of man who changes the story." Aurora flushed. Cade bowed his head, and something unspoken braided between them, strong as rope. When Aurora left that night, notebook under her arm, mother stable in her bed, Cade walked her to the car. Streetlights made halos in the rain. She turned to him, heart trembling in a way victory never achieved. "You keep showing up when I lose things," she said. He looked at her, steady and sure. "Maybe it's not about what you lose," he said. "Maybe it's about what you find." The words followed her into the car, into the night, into the part of her life that had just tilted on its axis. Aurora Vale didn't sleep so much as drift along the skin of the night, eyes open, hospital antiseptic still clinging to her hair. At 3 a.m. she padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured water, and watched the city's lights pulse like a heartbeat through her windows. Her mother was stable. The board vote was won. She should have felt invincible. Instead, she felt porous, like rain might go straight through her and pool on the floor. She opened her leather notebook and traced a thumb over the new crease at the centre, the one formed when Cade had been holding it and she'd been holding him with her eyes. On the next blank page she wrote, in the clean script she'd trained into herself, "Things that make me feel human." Under it she listed 3 items before the pen slowed: lemon pie, carpenters who listen, my mother's laugh. She tapped the pen against her lip, then added a 4th, silence that isn't empty. Her phone lit the counter. A message from an unknown number blinked. Kai left a thermos by your concierge, peppermint tea, for mornings that pretend to be nights. She smiled at the screen, warmth moving through the cold hour like sunrise arriving under cover. She replied before caution could clear its throat. I was making a list of things that matter. Peppermint tea qualifies. I know a good list when I meet one. By the way, your car service tomorrow is on strike. I can run you to your site visit if you want a driver who doesn't burn coffee. Aurora stared. She hadn't told him about the West Bank site inspection, an aging water plant slated for sensor upgrades if her team could convince the city it was worth the headline risk. He must have read it in the trade bulletin and then connected the dots. The care of it, quiet, precise, pressed at her sternum. Aurora, 9 a.m. at Wexford. Cade, I'll be the one leaning against the fountain like I own it. At 8:58 he was exactly where he said he'd be, coat zipped, cap tucked into a pocket. He had the thermos under one arm and a travel mug already steaming in his hand. The fountain flung silver into the winter air, the spray jeweled his jacket. He looked, Aurora thought, like a man who took weather as an equal. You really think you own that fountain? She asked, breath fogging. I think everything is better when you belong to it, instead of the other way around, he said, handing her the mug. Sip, it's hot. She did, and the mint braided with heat in her mouth. You were right. I often am, he said solemnly, and she laughed. On the drive west, the skyline thinned into warehouses and river sprawl. Cade drove like a person who believed in other people's bad decisions, but didn't hold them against anyone. His hands were sure on the wheel. When he checked his mirrors, it was with the focus of a craftsman verifying his line. Aurora read through the site dossier, flipping pages faster than her heartbeat would allow. She felt the meeting sharpening ahead like a cliff. You look like you're about to spar, Cade said, eyes on the road. I am, she said. The city engineer thinks sensors are politics dressed as tech. He hates the idea that anything invisible could be real. What will you say? He asked. That the invisible is holding his life up and he only notices when it drops him, she said, then smirked at herself. Less poetic than that. Poetry is just carpentry for the air, Cade said. Measure, cut, fit. She glanced at him. You're dangerous with those phrases. Only to people who don't like being seen, he said. At the plant the air tasted metallic, like old pipes telling stories. Aurora tightened her coat and walked with Cade to the chain-link gate, where a bored guard waved them through after scanning IDs. Her team was already gathered by the admin building, Willow from strategy, Kareem from systems, and Lila, her chief of staff, who had texted 3 times about optics. Is this your driver? Lila asked, voice pitched neutral. This is Cade, Aurora said evenly. He returned my notebook. He's my ride today. And yes, that's all the context you need. Lila blinked, then smiled with the competence of a woman who could move furniture with her eyebrows. Understood. Meeting in 5. Engineer's name is Dalton. He likes to be the smartest in the room, and he isn't. Copy, Aurora said. You don't have to wait. I can make myself useful, he said. I'll locate the good vending machine. Bring me the least offensive snack, she said, and he saluted. Inside the conference room, Dalton arrived with the weather of a man who'd had to fight for half the things he owned and now fought the wrong battles out of habit. He shook Aurora's hand like he wanted to win that interaction. She let him, then took back the room when she started to talk. She spoke in clean lines. Leak detection as early warning, sensors as fire alarms for water, the math of deferred maintenance. She told the story of the city's veins and how they were narrowing. She drew a picture of neighborhoods that would flood less because the system would whisper before it screamed. When Dalton smirked about cost, she didn't flinch. When he jabbed at vendors, she offered 3 pilot cities with numbers that sang. And then he said it. The inevitable thing he always said to women who made him feel the floor shifting. I'd feel better if I heard this from your technical lead. Kareem inhaled sharply, about to step up. Aurora lifted a hand. I am the technical lead on this deal, she said calmly, and the financial lead, and the person who'll take the blame if we get it wrong. You can feel however you like. The water will keep moving. The question is whether we help it do that with less violence. The room held its breath. Then Dalton nodded, once. Fine, he said. Pilot, 3 districts. If your numbers hold for 60 days, we expand. Her team's relief filled the space like heat. Aurora signed, shook hands, and stepped into the hall with the adrenaline come-down that always made her fingers too light. Cade was waiting by the vending machine with a crinkled bag in his hand. I present the least offensive snack, he said, holding up salted almonds. She took them and laughed. We got the pilot. Of course you did. He watched her shoulders drop. You okay? Yes, she said, surprised to hear it and mean it. Actually, yes. They walked the plant together, catwalks over steel tanks, sun shafting through high windows, the place humming with the patient labour of water made safe. Cade asked questions that made Aurora want to answer them. How do sensors talk through all this noise? What happens when a system lies? How do you decide which pipe gets rescued first? She told him about triage and fairness and algorithms that learned empathy if you taught them properly. She realized she'd been starving for this, conversation not shaped like a duel. On the drive back, a tabloid notification flashed across her screen. Aurora Vale's mystery man. The photo showed a blur that might have been Cade opening her car door at the hospital, her hand mid-reach, her face unguarded. Another photo showed them at the cafe window, lemon pie like a halo. Heat rose in her chest, sudden and bright. They found us, she said, anger a clean blade. Cade glanced over, taking in the headline, the angle, the insinuation. He didn't say, I told you so, or, this is bad. He said, do you want to pull over and breathe? She let out a sharp laugh. That is not how CEOs handle ambushes. How do they handle them? He asked. They make a statement. They get ahead of the story. They weaponize truth. What do you want to do? He said, turning down the volume on the car, not the version of you that gives good TV. Aurora stared at the photo again. She saw her own face, unarmored, the curve of her mouth finding warmth. She thought of her mother's grin and how love refused to be scheduled. She closed her eyes. I don't want to pretend you don't exist, she said, but I also don't want to feed them. Okay, he said, then we do neither. We keep living, and if someone asks, we say the truth in 7 words or less. What truth fits in 7 words? He considered, mouth twitching. We met, we talk, that's enough for now. She exhaled, a thread loosening. That's good. I often am, he repeated, and she rolled her eyes, grateful for the joke. Back at Wexford, her PR lead was waiting in the lobby, already mid-scroll. We can kill the item, Tova said briskly, walking as if the floor were a treadmill. Or we can replace it with something cleaner. Philanthropy luncheon next week, or the West Bank pilot. Make that the headline. Neither, Aurora said. If they call, you say, we met, we talk, that's enough for now, and then you hang up. Tova blinked, recalibrating. Understood. In the elevator, alone at last, Aurora leaned against the mirrored wall and watched 2 versions of herself breathe. Cade stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, gaze quiet. My life is a house with many rooms, she said. It has always been. I'm realizing I don't have to invite the whole city into the kitchen to prove the house exists. I build houses, he said. Kitchens are better when they're for people who actually eat together. The elevator dinged. She almost didn't move. Come upstairs, she said, then flushed at her own boldness. My office. It has a view that makes the rest of this feel small for a minute. He hesitated, then nodded. They stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass as the afternoon poured over the river, all the barges lined like commas in a long sentence. Papers lay on Aurora's desk in obedient stacks. Her awards glinted, politely mute. She watched Cade take the room in without the performative awe people thought she required. He stopped at a photograph. The three of them on that wind-beaten pier. She looks stubborn, he said, pointing at her mother. She is, Aurora said. She's also the reason I know what love is when it happens quietly. He turned to her, and the room narrowed to the space between their breaths. And is that what this is? Her heart thudded. She could list metrics for cities and margins for pipes. She could not quantify the way standing 2 feet from him felt like stepping into a steady current. She reached for honesty that wasn't weaponized. It might be the blueprint, she said. He smiled, slow and certain. Blueprints are promises you can build. Her phone began to buzz. Board member, reporter, brother, calendar alerts stacking like sandbags. She silenced it and set it face down. Stay a minute, she said. I can, he said. I want to. She moved closer, not to be dramatic, but to be precise, and he met her there without claiming more than she offered. They didn't kiss. They didn't rush. They stood in the late light. 2 people practicing a choreography neither had learned but both could feel. Below them, the city breathed through its invisible veins. Inside her, something unclenched that had been clenched for years. Aurora Vale, who could keep an empire from leaking, allowed one small flood. Warmth, unarmed and unashamed, sweeping her clean. Aurora Vale woke to headlines. Her phone was still on the nightstand, buzzing before dawn, glowing with the unmistakable heat of scandal. Aurora Vale's mystery man spotted again. The tabloid headline sat atop a grainy photo of her in the lobby of Wexford, Cade a shadow at her side, hand resting lightly on her back as though steadying her through the revolving door. The shot wasn't salacious, but the world knew how to make anything salacious when a woman like Aurora, curvy, wealthy single, was involved. She closed her eyes, let the buzz rattle the room, then rolled out of bed. Coffee, shower, silk blouse, charcoal trousers, war paint for a battle she hadn't scheduled. By 7, her PR lead, Tova, was in her office, pacing with 2 phones in hand. We can't ignore this. If we don't give them a narrative, they'll invent one. Mystery man. Driver turned lover. You know the drill. Do we go philanthropic distraction? Do we deny? Aurora, pouring coffee into a heavy mug, said calmly, we tell the truth. Tova froze mid-step. Which truth? That he returned my phone and my notebook. That he's my friend. Aurora's tone was ice-cut clean. And that my personal life is not a commodity. Tova's brow furrowed. That's 7 words short of suicide in your world. It's also the only way I can breathe in it, Aurora said, sipping. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't reporters. Cade, do you want me to vanish for a while? I can, if it helps. She stared at the words, thumb hovering, then typed, no, don't vanish. Just don't let them own us. The city water pilot launched that week. The press cameras were merciless, waiting for a soundbite that might confirm or deny their narrative. Aurora stood at the podium in her cream coat, curvy silhouette outlined against steel pipes and riveted walls, and spoke about invisible infrastructure, about lives made safer by things no one bothered to see. When a reporter shouted, "Is the man by your side part of your personal infrastructure now?" she let the silence drag, then smiled faintly. "He's part of my honesty. That's what matters." Gasps, clicks, a ripple through the crowd. But she didn't flinch. She moved on with her speech. Behind the scaffolding, Cade watched. His jaw was set, but when her eyes found his, he nodded once, steady, proud. That night, Aurora didn't go home. She texted her mother instead. "Dinner tomorrow. Lemon pie, I promise." Then she walked the streets until her heels pinched, ending at a workshop Cade had mentioned but never invited her to. The warehouse door was cracked. She pushed it open and found the world smelling of sawdust and varnish. Light spilled over half-built tables, stacked planks, chisels in a row like disciplined soldiers. Cade stood over a workbench, sleeves rolled, hands stained with oil. "You came," he said simply. "I did." She moved deeper into the room, her presence filling the space like a shift in the grain. "I wanted to see where you build." He gestured around, shy but not ashamed. "It's not Vale Capital." "It's better," she said, running her hand along the smooth edge of a finished banister. "Everything here is touched. Nothing is abstract." He studied her. "And what are you doing here, really?" Aurora exhaled. "Reminding myself I don't have to live entirely in abstractions." Something in him softened. He wiped his hands on a rag, came closer. "They're going to keep coming for us, you know that." "I know. You could end it with a statement. Distance yourself. Call me a driver who returned a phone and nothing else." Aurora met his gaze. And would you believe me if I did? He hesitated. No. Then why should they? She said, voice dropping. The silence between them thickened until she felt it like heat. His hand brushed hers, calloused, deliberate. Not taking, just asking. She didn't pull away. I don't want to be your headline, he said. You're not, she said. You're my blueprint. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, but they landed between them with the weight of something true. Days blurred into weeks. The pilot program began returning data, leaks detected earlier, pressure stabilized, neighborhoods spared their usual floods. The board softened, the investors leaned closer. Aurora should have been exhilarated. Instead, she found herself saving pieces of her day for Cade. The texts, the brief calls, the late-night tea at his workshop, where they didn't have to pretend to be anything other than two people breathing the same air. Her mother met him again, this time at their family home. Over roast chicken and pie, she studied him the way mothers do, then leaned toward Aurora in the kitchen. He looks at you like you're human first. Don't lose that. Aurora pretended not to cry over slicing lemons, but outside the noise kept building. Photos, columns, anonymous sources. At a gala, an investor leaned too close and murmured, "Don't let this distraction cost you credibility." Aurora smiled sweetly and said, "The only credibility I've ever lost was listening to men who thought I needed their advice." She walked away, trembling but unbroken. That night she found herself at Cade's workshop again, collapsing into a chair. "I don't know how much more I can hold," she admitted. "Every room feels like a test, every headline like a noose." Cade crouched beside her chair, steady as bedrock. "Then stop holding everything," he said. "Let me hold some." Tears slipped hot and sudden. For years she had believed tears were currency she couldn't afford, but here they were, and he was still here. "Stay," she whispered. "I will," he said. And for the first time in a decade, Aurora Vale fell asleep not in a tower or a car service, but in a workshop that smelled of cedar and peppermint, her cheek against a man's chest, his heartbeat loud enough to drown the noise outside. The next morning, light pooled through the high windows. She woke to the sound of saws and sandpaper. Cade was already at the bench, building a table wide enough for 6. She sat up, hair undone, curves outlined in his shirt she'd borrowed. "What's this one for?" she asked. "For dinners," he said, not looking up. "For people who need a place to belong." She wrapped her arms around herself, warmth blooming at the center. For years she had thought success meant towers and pipelines. Maybe it also meant tables and pie. And maybe, just maybe, it meant not being afraid of losing what she couldn't control, because sometimes what you lost returned to you, steadier, larger, enough to change the shape of your whole story. The storm rolled in like a closing argument. No room for objections, no recess, just sky turned to slate and a wind that scoured the city's edges raw. By mid-afternoon, sirens braided with thunder. Aurora stood at her office window and watched the river lift its shoulders. The pilot sensors were already pinging her dashboard in a staccato flare. Pressure spikes, anomalous flow, a pattern that added up to her eye to something worse than a leak. It looked like a failure beginning to name itself. Her phone vibrated on the desk. "Tova, Kareem, the deputy mayor, her mother, made soup, call me when you can." She slid them to mute and dialed Cade. He answered on the first ring. "I was about to call you," he said. "The West Bank plant?" "The East Line manifold," she said. "It's lighting up like a confession." He was quiet a beat. "You're already on your way." "Elevator," she said, stepping into the car as the doors sighed shut. "I'm 2 blocks out," he replied. "I'll meet you at the curb." The lobby felt like a lung held too long. The revolving door spat her into rain that punched sideways. Cade's truck idled at the no-parking zone, windshield wipers carving metronomes through the storm. She climbed in, soaked to the thighs, and buckled without ceremony. "You're wet," he said, handing her a ragged towel. "I know. Brilliant observation." She blotted at her hair. "We don't have hours," she said, eyes on the map. "If the manifold ruptures, the floodgate will trip and the whole south grid goes dark. Hospitals, shelters, my mother's street." "Then we start driving," he said, and pulled into traffic as if the lanes belonged to calm people. They spoke in shorthand, their own grammar, built quietly over weeks of pie and peppermint. She called Kareem to reroute flow. He called out exits and alleyways the GPS wouldn't trust in better weather. Twice he took back streets only couriers knew. Once he cut across a lot behind a defunct textile mill where the asphalt rose like broken knuckles. Aurora braced her palm on the dash, not to steady herself but to feel the truck's heartbeat. They reached the East Line station just as the storm flexed harder. Chain link rattled in the wind. A security guard waved them through, eyes wide, radio squawking. The manifold building loomed. Concrete, corrugated roof, a door that stuck like a bad memory. Inside, the air was hot and metallic. Gauges jittered, a pump screamed against itself. Water hissed somewhere it shouldn't. "Control room," she said. "Manual override if the software panics." Cade fell in at her shoulder, steps matched to hers without choreography. In the control room, Kareem's voice crackled through the speaker. "We're seeing the spike. We can't drop pressure remotely. The valve actuator's not responding. Something's jammed." "Then we do it by hand," Aurora said, "which nobody wants to do because it's heavy and old and unforgiving." Cade's mouth twitched. "My specialties." They ran the catwalk to the valve wheel. It was the size of a dining table, red paint flaking under a crust of years. The gauge needle trembled in the red. Water thumped in the walls like a fist on a locked door. "You need 2 bodies," Cade said, already setting his grip. 3, really. 2, she said, setting hers above his. The wheel had a memory, and it wasn't of kindness. They heaved. It didn't budge. "Again," he said. They put their backs into it. Aurora felt her shoulder bite, her forearms burn. On the 3rd pull it gave like a stubborn truth, then turned an inch, 2, the metal complaining with a long, low groan. The gauge quivered toward safety, then spiked again. "Something's caught in the seat," Aurora panted. "Debris." "Backflow screen?" he asked. "Down the gantry," she said. "Grate level." They sprinted into heat and noise. The grate was where the system exhaled before it broke. A torrent flashed silver below, trying to chew through its restraints. A coil of something, plastic, a sheared gasket, had wedged itself exactly where it could do the most harm. "Too far to reach," Cade said, eyeing the drop. Aurora scanned the room, mind riffling through a lifetime of materials. "Pole," she said. "We need a hook." Cade pointed to a maintenance locker. Inside, a length of rebar, a rusted S-hook, duct tape that had seen better days. He lashed the hook to the bar without wasting apology on improvisation. She lay flat on the grate, pressed her cheek to cold metal, and threaded the makeshift tool through steam and raw toward the jam. The first try slipped. The second caught and tore. The third, her breath held so long her vision tightened, snagged. She angled her wrist, felt the hook bite, and pulled. Cade anchored her calves with one hand. With the other he leaned his weight into the rebar, steady, patient. The scrap came free with a ragged shriek. The torrent pitched, then steadied. Somewhere above them a pump stopped screaming. They lay there a second, both breathing hard, the storm outside and inside recalibrating. Kareem's voice across the speaker again. "Pressure's dropping. Holding. You did it. You. Holy. Okay, valves stabilizing. You've got flow within safe bands." Aurora laughed, the sound unpretty and perfect. She rolled to her back and looked at the corrugated roof as if it were the sky. Cade's face appeared above her, wet lashes, mouth curved. "You're shaking," he said. "We just pulled a city back from the edge," she said. "I'm allowed." He held out a hand. She took it. He pulled her up, not into a hug, not into a headline, but into the space where 2 people shared a weight and then shared the lightness that followed. They stood a long moment, their breath slowing. The storm knocked at the roof. The manifold hummed, not in panic but in relief. "Go make your statement," Cade said at last. "Tell them the invisible did its job because someone believed it mattered." "You mean you," she said. "I mean us," he replied. The press waited outside the fence, kept at bay by security and rain that turned lenses useless. Tova's umbrella bobbed toward them like a small battleship. "They're rabid," she said. "They heard something went wrong and want to crown you villain or hero before dinner." Aurora tugged her wet hair into something like order. "Neither," she said. "I'll be a person who tells the truth." On camera, she explained exactly what had happened. An actuator failure, a manual override, a team that knew where to lean. She did not say who lay on a grate with a hook made of rebar and faith. She said we. When someone shouted, "Was your mystery man there?" she didn't flinch. "He's not a mystery," she said. "He's Cade. He builds things that last. Today we did that together." Not scandal, not denial. a sentence that fit in one breath and refused to be chewed into something cheaper. The reporters blinked, recalibrating. Someone lowered a camera, as if remembering that the city they lived in had just kept its water, its lights, its hospital power. When the microphones dropped, she found Cade by the truck. He leaned against the door, arms crossed, watching her the way he always had, not as a spectacle, but as a person in weather. "You used my name," he said softly. "I don't want us to be a rumor," she said. "I want us to be real." He touched her wrist, weathered thumb, careful. "Okay," he said. "Let's be real." The days after felt like tide receding. The pilot's numbers settled into a steady humming triumph. Headlines pivoted, begrudging at first, then earnest. Quiet heroics at Eastline, the day the city held. Board members who'd braced to scold came instead bearing congratulations. The deputy mayor called to say the expansion vote would be a formality. Aurora went home, showered the storm out of her hair, and slept for 12 hours. When she woke, her mother was at the kitchen table, knitting a lopsided scarf the colour of old lemons. "You did good," her mother said without looking up. "The news said so. My neighbour said so. The way the tea tasted this morning said so." Aurora poured coffee, let her shoulders fall. "I had help." "I assume so. You can't fix a city alone." Her mother's knitting paused. "Invite him for dinner. Bring him as he is, and bring yourself as you are." That evening, Aurora drove to the workshop with a pie cooling on the passenger seat. The warehouse door was open. Sawdust drifted like mist in late light. Cade stood at a long table that hadn't existed weeks ago, sanding the edge until it sang under his palm. "You built it," she said, setting the pie down at one end. The table could seat 6, 8 in a pinch. It was simple, generous, sturdy, a promise masquerading as furniture. "For dinners," he said, "for belonging." She ran her hand along the grain. "For us," he nodded, "and for whoever needs a chair." They ate pie with shop rags for napkins, laughing when crumbs landed like stars on the floor. She told him about the expansion. He told her about a staircase commission with risers that wanted to be poetry. Outside, the world continued its noisy angle. Inside, time rounded off. After dishes, he pulled something from a drawer, a small box, plain wood, a brass hinge that looked like a wink. He slid it to her. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. Inside lay a phone case, walnut, hand-carved, edges like tide-smoothed stone. The inner lining was felt, soft as a blessing. "You don't use cases," he said, smile caught between tease and tenderness. "But sometimes the right one isn't armor. It's a frame." Aurora lifted the case, its weight exact. She held up her iPhone, the same titanium slab that had started all of this, and for a moment she saw the lean, relentless life she'd built without it. Then she set the phone in the case. It clicked into place with a sound so small it felt private. "I want to remember not to drop what matters," she said, echoing herself from that first coffee. "But I also want to admit I'm human." "Humans deserve good joinery," he said, "the kind you can take apart if you need to fix what's inside." She slid the phone into her palm, thumb tracing the new edge. It felt like grace you could hold. They stood there, not rushing the moment toward a prescribed end. When he kissed her, it wasn't a victory lap. It was a quiet alignment, a curve that found its match, a promise fit into a mortise it had been carved for. She tasted peppermint and sawdust and the end of the storm. Later they carried the table to her mother's house. 2 blocks, 3 neighbors volunteering their hands, a passing kid shouting, "Yo, that's a serious table." They set it in the dining room where sunlight loved to lay down. Her mother put soup on it, then her knitting, then her palm, as if to bless it. They ate, they talked. They left 2 chairs empty for what the future might bring. When the dishes were washed and the pie reduced to story, Aurora walked Cade to the porch. Night had settled without drama. A cat stalked a leaf as if it were destiny. "I lost a phone," she said, leaning against the rail. "You did," he said. "I found my life," she said, and didn't laugh at herself for the line. He looked at her, long and steady. "Then let's keep building the parts that make it stay found." They stood a while longer, not because the world demanded a grand finale, but because the quiet served what they'd made. When she finally went inside, she set her phone on the table, case and all, and didn't turn it face up. The city hummed in its invisible ways. In the next room, her mother's knitting clicked a patient rhythm. In the workshop across town, sawdust settled like gentle snow. Aurora Vale, who had learned to hold everything too tight, loosened her hands and discovered nothing precious fell. Instead, something took root, a life measured not only in deals closed and crises averted, but in dinners eaten, tables filled, water running clear, and a love that arrived like a return. Not dramatic, not begged for, simply right on time.